Welcome to Impasto Oils. We're here at Forks of the Credit in Caledon, where I'll be showing you my painting process. And particularly, I'll be showing you impasto painting, which means to paint thickly. So come join me on a painting adventure. I love coming to Forks of the Credit to hike. Just one of my favorite places to go. I think it's because the landscape, just lots of hills and valleys. You get lots of almost like bird eye vantage points. You can look over the landscape. And whenever I'm walking through, I always see places I want to do paintings. And I think that's one of the most important things of plein air painting is spending the time scouting locations that you want to paint. Here I am again. I found a nice spot here by a little pond. I think it'll make for a nice painting. The light is disappearing kind of quickly, so I'll have to move fast. But it's been an overcast day, a little bit foggy, and I think it makes for some nice atmospheric perspective. So I'll do my best to capture that. I like using glass as my palette. It makes for an easier cleanup. I found when mixing colors on a wooden palette, the wooden palette would absorb the oils and tend to dry out the paints. I just pretty much taped a 9x12 sheet of glass here to my easel. So here I'm just pouring out my Gamsol. That's my turpentine alternative of choice. For this painting, I'm just using a limited palette of 4 colors: phthalo blue, magenta, lemon yellow, and titanium white. I find it just so much more satisfying. With these few ingredients, I can create a full painting. You know, I can get a full range of greens and purples and oranges. For instance here, this is kind of like a burnt umber, burnt sienna color that I'm toning my canvas with. And traditionally, a lot of artists will do that. They'll put a warm tone on their canvas to harmonize things so that if any of the underpainting is showing through, there's that color harmony throughout the painting. I mix that myself, and sometimes I make a cooler or a warmer underpainting, depending on what I feel the scene needs. I'm just sketching out my composition here. As you can see, I tend to start with my horizon line. I don't know, I find that's a good starting point to figure out if the horizon line is high on the canvas or low. And then I can kind of figure out what's the background elements, the foreground elements. And I'll spend, you know, anywhere from 10 to 15 minutes sketching out what I see. You know, it's good not to be too committed to putting every branch or leaf down at this stage. Plein air painting forces you to work quickly. And so as I'm sketching, I'm trying to sketch out the most basic shape that I see. In fact, you'll see I'll often be squinting when I'm painting. And it's because I want to try to find a way to simplify what I see. For beginners, it can be very overwhelming to walk out into a landscape and think, okay, I'm going to capture these trees, this sky, this water, the values, the colors. There's a lot to consider. Basically, all an artist is doing is creating a simple representation of the landscape before them. Another important thing I like to consider, and obviously you don't see it here, but I do like to spend more time doing thumbnail sketches. You know, if you do a thumbnail sketch and figure out your composition, you'll be much more satisfied with the final result. There's no sense spending those 2 hours painting something and you're not quite sure if the composition is something that you want to dedicate that time to. I've had enough experience with that. You know, it felt like a waste of 2 hours. So I just encourage people to practice that. As you can see, I'm sketching out with my paints here. I'm not committed to this drawing. As you see, I'm wiping things. I'm actually using the paper towel to reveal the whiteness of the canvas. But as well, if I get to the point where I'm not satisfied with my drawing, I could just wipe it all down. It's all wet paint at this point. So here I'm, just for my own satisfaction, I'm putting in a few values. It helps me get a sense for my composition and see if it's something I'm excited to commit the next few hours to. Basically, a composition is how your canvas is divided, where the horizon line is, where your major shapes are, and where the major values are in your painting. You create a sense of visual harmony when you're planning your composition. After I get all my sketching down, I like to spend 10 to 20 minutes mixing my palette. Sometimes even when I'm just taking a break, I just like to sit out on a picnic bench and practice breaking down the basic colors that I see. It's an enjoyable part. It's almost like building a puzzle. You're looking at what color makes this. How do I make this dark green? Or how do I make this light green? What would the sky color be? You're really using your artistic judgment, and as you get more experience, you find that you can actually push and shift these colors. You're not always just painting exactly what you see, but in some areas you want to exaggerate. Maybe a green becomes more like a yellow next to a purple. You want to create these different contrasts. Pretty much starting with the background. It's the most delicate part of the painting. It's kind of muted color. I guess the other thing as well is when you're painting landscapes, it does make sense to paint your background elements because you're going to overlap trees, for instance, and hills and landscapes on top of those background shapes. I mean, one of the things I love about oil painting is that it's one of the most forgiving mediums. You can really scrape down, you can grab your palette knife and just take off the paint. You can paint a dark on a light area or a light on a dark area. It's forgiving in that sense. Whereas if I was painting with watercolor, I would be really conscious of the color of my paper because I could only go as light as my paper. So oils they're really forgiving and really fun. The only challenge is transporting your wet painting back to the car at the end of a painting. Otherwise, it's great. So here, I couldn't wait to get my vibrant green tree in there. I wanted to get a sense of depth. I had the subdued tree line in the background, a bit of more of a purpley color, which I wanted to contrast this lime green. It's just so satisfying to start putting those elements down because they're playing off of each other. Just reestablishing my horizon line. I don't want that to get too lost. That's an important element of the composition. Get some darks in there. One of the reasons artists tend to paint from dark to light with oil painting, because it's an opaque medium, you can paint your dark shapes in. I always think of it in my mind as rendering like a sphere or a cube. If you just say you had a sphere on a plane, you could paint the general shape of that sphere with the shadow and the midtones. And then when it comes to putting your highlight, that's your finishing touch. That's like the smallest shape on your painting, it would be the highlight. So why not just paint all of the solid colors in first and then put a dab of your highlight in? That's the way things tend to work in nature, is that they have shadows, mid-tone areas, and then they have highlights. And the highlights are usually the smallest shapes. So why not leave it for last? This was an artistic choice. I'm really pushing the warmth of the shadows. Even before I started this painting, I knew the highlights would tend to be on the cool side of overall of the painting because it's an overcast day. And I wanted to kind of exaggerate the complement, the warmer shadows. I knew when I was mixing the shadows of the trees, I could see that they were warmer, but I just pushed them a little bit more just to create more visual interest. As you get more experience plein air painting, you start to learn that you paint what you see, but you also know where to exaggerate. So I got pretty much all my darkest darks in there. I'm painting in some of my mid-tone areas. I'm always excited to get my skyline in there. When I started painting plein air, I found it was really challenging to figure out the value of my paints. You know, when you look out in the real world, when you look at the sky is so bright and so intense sometimes. And you just think, how am I going to interpret this in paint? And for the longest time, I was just using pure white for sky. I would mix my colors and I would lay them down, and the sky would just never feel light enough. I think it's a beginner tendency to keep putting more white. But here you can see I'm trying not to fall into that trap. I think a more successful painting is when it doesn't have to be the purest of white and it doesn't have to be as dark as black. Somewhere a range in between. And for atmospheric perspective, like for foggy days, it actually works to your advantage to not have it completely blown out or bright and not have your darks completely black. And so here you can see there's this sense of atmosphere that's happening because all the colors have a smoky quality to them. So I'm keeping my palette relatively close to the middle range. It's so satisfying to get those highlights in. I am exaggerating them a little bit because obviously the brightest thing in the painting is the sky, and I'm pushing those reflections a little bit because I want to I want to make sure that that looks like water, even though this whole painting is very impressionistic and at points verging on abstract. That's kind of the joy of plein air painting is, you're doing the best that you can when you're outdoors. We'll be very critical and harsh of our painting when we're on location, but always, without fail, when I get into the studio and I look at the painting, especially the next day, I get home and I look at my painting and I think, it's a successful painting if I get the feeling of the location again. Yeah, not comparing it to the actual location because you can never, do that justice. If you want to, you might as well just take a photograph, but a painting is its own thing. It's basically capturing the mood and the feeling of a place. That's why I like using big brush strokes when painting. I don't want to hide my brush strokes. I think brush strokes convey the feeling depending on the direction that they're going in, depending on how thick the paint is, the color that's used. I mean, there's no secret to the reason why painters like Van Gogh are known as expressive and emotional painters. It's because their painting is communicating that through their brush strokes. And particularly impasto painting, you want those brushstrokes to be visible. That's what gives it life. I'm pretty happy with how things turned out. One criticism is I wish that the tree line was softer. The trees are the darkest things in the painting, and I wanted the background tree line to be more fuzzy, more soft. But I'm pretty happy with the purples and the greens and how they're playing on each other. And within the time frame I was able to finish this painting, I'm pretty satisfied. So one of the challenges is to figure out when we're finished our painting. And I've been finding that, because obviously you can just keep working a painting until you run out of daylight. But one of the factors is, did I capture what I initially saw? What intrigued me about this place? And what is my motif? For this painting, I wanted to capture the lake, this pond, and the tree line with atmosphere. I wanted to have the play of the background and the foreground. And so I feel satisfied that I was able to capture that. So I know that I feel like this is completed because it says those things that I wanted to capture. So, packed up and onward to our next painting location. Well, I'm here at Hamilton Harbor. It's been a rainy day. Hopefully it doesn't rain again. But I think if it stays like this for the next few hours, I'll have a chance at getting a painting in. Yeah, so let's see how this thing goes. It's so much fun coming down to the harbor to do some painting. There's people going for walks, people sailing. Even surprisingly, there's a lot of wildlife. There's geese and seagulls and fish popping out of the water. Yeah, it's just a really exciting place to paint. There's always a lot of motion and interest happening here. I'm toning my canvas. As I mentioned before, I like to use a limited palette. And it's funny how a lot of people, they like to bring their own burnt umber, burnt sienna. I like to mix my own. And usually I mix like an orange. I mix the magenta and lemon yellow, and I make an orange. And then just add a touch of blue. And it seems to give me a satisfying brown. I wanted to mention that because whenever I'm out painting with people that are just beginning, it seems confusing for them to figure out how to mix brown. But it's not hard. I really enjoy plein air painting. There's something I find very freeing about painting on location. For many years, I painted using photographs, and there's always a process of editing the photos and touching it up in Photoshop. And I don't know, it seems like it adds a layer of complication that you don't necessarily need. And when I'm painting on location, I think that's the sense of freedom, is that whatever's in front of me is my inspiration. It's just me and my environment. For the few hours that you're there, it feels a bit like a home away from home. So that's one of the reasons why I keep coming back to plein air painting. I know you feel like you have a purpose. You're someplace you might have not been before, but you have a purpose there, and it feels good. As well, when you're plein air painting, if you haven't gone outside and painted before, I know it can be intimidating for novices, because people are coming by and they're looking at your painting, and it's not always going to go as you plan. But I find you get used to it after a while. And for the most part, even when your painting is not working out so well, people are very encouraging. So yeah, don't let that discourage you if you want to go out and try plein air painting. Just get out there and be a little bit courageous. And after a few times, you'll find you get used to it. And for the most part, people, they see that you're focused and they tend to leave you be. And for this painting, one of the main interests was the boats and how they reflect on the water. The composition itself has a lot of strong horizontal elements. You see the horizon line, the line of boats, even the way I laid my canvas out. Basically, the buildings in the background and the masts are strong, kind of opposite compositional elements that are helping balance things. Yeah, I'm also adding some values to my underpainting. It's a bit of a luxury to add some values to figure out if my composition is working. I tend to put two canvases on my easel here. I like pushing my canvas forward when I'm painting. If the canvas is too far back, then I'm not painting on the full surface of the canvas. So I'm always pushing it closer to me. So you'll probably notice that as several paintings, they always have two canvases on the easel. I'm laying out my colors. Again, I tend to mix from dark to light. I find the major darkest colors and I lay those out first. And then my midtones and usually the pools of color closest to me are my sky colors. I want to encourage you to don't be afraid to squeeze out more than enough paint on your palette. It's a tendency for people that are beginning painting to use very little paint on their palette. And you're always going to need more than what you squeeze out, I find. So for painting this size, this is actually 16 by 20 inches. I've been squeezing out about the size of a toonie. I know for Canadians, they'll understand what I'm talking about. But basically, you know, roughly about 2 inches wide by an inch high of paint. I find it's a good amount. For, you know, maybe like 8 by 10 canvas, I'll squeeze out about an inch's worth. You know, when you're plein air painting, you want everything accessible. You don't want to be fiddling around, getting more paint out. There's a chance that you might be losing the light. Sometimes that happens where, you know, you set up and the lighting conditions are perfect. And by the time, you know, you have your canvas toned, the lighting has changed. With time, you learn to adapt to that. You know, it's better to have everything where you need it when you're painting. So squeeze out enough paint and you don't have to worry about that later on. As well, when people are afraid to use too much paint on their palette, what I do later on when I'm cleaning up is I always carry sandwich bags with me, and I scrape up my paint and I put it in a sandwich bag, and the seal creates an airtight pocket so the paint doesn't dry on you. And sometimes when I'm in between paintings, I like to reuse those paints. I like to fill my own tubes, and either I mix, you know, some special colors with the paints that I have available, or I mix like a gray tone or a warm gray or a cool gray. Lately I've been using this limited palette, but there are times when paintings in the studio or special paintings, you know, I have special pigments that I mix myself. So you're putting so much paint on your palette, but you can feel comfortable that it's not going to go to waste and you're going to reuse it at some point. Anybody that I talk to that wants to get into oil painting or is an oil painter, you know, they always talk about the expense of the paints. Never so much about the brushes or the canvas. It's always the oil paints that are the most expensive thing. So, you know, there's ways around reusing your paints. So you don't have to worry about feeling like it's a loss if you put too much paint out. Yeah, here I'm applying the paints quite thickly. You know, I feel like at times I'm icing a cake. I think that's the mentality I have, is that I want it to look thick and juicy. And sometimes it feels like when I'm looking at my finished painting, it's like I'm looking at a thick cake. Yeah, I like that look. I like the look of the impasto oil. Yeah, I really load up my brushes, as you can see here. You know, I mix a large pool of color and just dab my brush into it. And, don't be afraid to get it in there or get it blending with the other colors. Oil is such a forgiving medium that you can paint over top, push colors back and forth, scrape things down if you feel it's not working. We have a lot of options for us as oil painters. One of the first things I wanted to get down was that distant blue horizon. When I started the painting, that was one of the things that really jumped out at me, was that atmospheric haze. So I wanted to get that color down right away, just in case the lighting conditions changed, especially at this time of day. The sun is going down, it's about 7 o'clock, and I know things are going to be changing quite rapidly. And that blue haze was a key point in the painting I wanted to get across. The motif is basically the boats in the marina with the reflecting water, but the most vibrant color is that intense blue. And that's why I like using phthalo blue. It's such a vibrant, intense primary blue. When you mix it with white, it can really pop really well. Another thing as well is I'm pretty much painting in my lightest areas in the sky here. But if you really spend time and observe the sky, you'll notice there are warm and cool areas. Besides values, like you can see the buildings themselves are one of the darkest values. But within an area like the clouds and the sky, the play of warm and cool. And when you can successfully convey that in your painting, it creates like a shimmering effect. So when I'm mixing my palette for instance, the sky, I know I have the sun is setting, the clouds are illuminated with the sun. It's not a pure white, it has a bit of a yellow and an orange tinge to it. And I have my cool areas, and there's a few shimmering values in between there. There's a few pinks and violets. This is a test of your observation, to be able to see these things and capture them. A lot of artists that work with color, they exaggerate those differences as well. They'll push the warms and the cools a little bit to create that visual interest. And the value range, it's very similar, but the colors are different. That's basically what the Impressionists did, was they would create visual interest with contrasting temperatures and complementary colors. Yeah, I'm establishing some of the dark areas under my boats. So I like to work from dark to light most often. So I wanted to establish the shadows under these boats and, reaffirm that definite line. I painted in my sky first because I was a little bit concerned about losing that value and that lighting. And now I'm moving on to the water because I don't want the sky to change too rapidly and then the reflection looks like it doesn't belong to the sky. So it was a conscious effort to work on the sky and the water. As well, I left the boats for last because it's the most complicated area. So I don't want to get lost in the details of the boats just yet. I have to look at the big picture because I know time is of the essence here. And the other thing is, water is such a challenging thing to paint, but when you get it right, it's very satisfying. As plein air painting, you can't spend too much time trying to recreate exactly every ripple in the water. You're looking at the general sense, the general properties of water, the reflectivity, where there are darker areas of ripple, but not exactly. It would take too much time to get lost in those details. You also see here that the reflection of the masts is helping that vertical balance for the composition. If there was no masts and there was no buildings, then I think this composition would be too weak. There's just too many horizontal things going on. We have a few angles, we have a few verticals that's creating some visual interest. And those buildings off to the left create some asymmetry because everything else is very symmetrical. It's a funny thing too as well that I'm so used to toning my canvas with this warm burnt sienna, but it makes it you can see the areas that need to be finished. There's a lot of similar tones in here, and it kind of helps indicate the incomplete areas. As well, you can see my paint keeps getting thicker. As I'm painting over top of other colors, I keep applying a thicker paint. That seems to be the best way to working in Impasto. You can see here, yeah, just plowing it on here, just so you get rich color. As well, because I'm squinting so often, this is really helping me with these boats. There's so much detail and so much information there. I'm doing my best to treat it like abstract shapes. Just to get my darks in there, my midtones, and finishing off with some of the highlights. In fact, I think the lightest values in the painting are the tops of the boats. I really want them to feel like they have some solidity to them, some dimension. So satisfying to paint those masts in as well. It really helps sell it as a marina. Yeah, just letting the paint, carry on, like drag some of the paint from the trees into the sky. Yeah, oil painting is such a great medium for that. Don't be afraid to let things blend into each other. Yeah, when painting from life, there's a certain element of memory. If you're painting some boats and your main boat just takes off, you have to learn to deal with it. It can be a little bit frustrating at the beginning, but if you have your sketch in place and you remember the main colors that were used on that boat, you have to just simply work from memory. And yeah, with every painting, you get more practice and you get more confident with being able to fill in the details. So I'm reestablishing some of the darks and the boats here. I felt like they were getting a little bit too lost, so just darkening some of the tops, some of the reflection. Yeah, I'm pretty satisfied with how things worked out. Again, as I kept repeating, those masks and the buildings are fundamental to the composition. The motif for this painting was about the reflection of the boats, and I feel pretty satisfied that I was able to capture that within the time frame. Well, here we are again. We're at Bronte Provincial Park in Oakville, and as you can see, it's a very bright day, very sunny. It's very different than the other paintings and the other locations we've been at. So it's going to make for something different. There's a lot of direct sunlight. There's not going to be as much shadows because we kind of got the sun looking into our view. But I don't know, I think it's a really nice field of flowers and picturesque barn scene. So I think it'll make for a nice painting. So come check it out and see how this goes. So this has been one of my favorite places to frequent for the past few years when I've been doing plein air painting. Actually, it's just down the road from my grandparents. So I like to come here for its convenience and its natural beauty. Yeah, and here you see I'm laying out my colors. I have my basic palette of phthalo blue, magenta, and lemon yellow, but I also added like a lavender, purple, a turquoise, and a pink. I get empty tubes and I like to mix my own colors in the studio. You know, I've been finding that I like the pearlescent quality you get from these three colors. And in this instance, because there's actually a lot of purple wildflowers, you know, having this intense purple to start with is really advantageous. One of the challenges that artists are always facing, if you're trying to match a color of, like, just say flowers, for instance, sometimes you need to mix a couple of colors together, and the colors tend to lose intensity or chroma. So in this case, this is one of the reasons why I mixed my own colors. The purple and the turquoise and the pink were not necessarily from my three basic palette of phthalo blue, magenta, and lemon yellow. You know, sometimes I'll use other colors in the studio, like I'll use ultramarine blue and alizarin crimson with titanium white to get a violet or a purple. Or magenta, for instance, is a wonderful color, but you can't get the intensity that you can get from a cadmium red. So for my pink, I used a cadmium red with titanium white and a bit of cadmium yellow. That's one of the challenges, is getting that intensity. And I find mixing my own colors, you know, tubing them has come in handy in that regard. And the other thing is, you know, sometimes artists have a hard time being motivated when it comes to working on paintings. And if you have some reason to go into the studio, for instance, like, you know, experimenting with colors or filling tubes, it just gets you in the studio and it gets you working on stuff. So I find it's never really a problem to be motivated to paint because I just enjoy it so much. But having a thing like that to be able to, you know, motivate me, you know, filling tubes, it just is exciting and fun as well. It's a real hot one today. So as you see, I have an umbrella set up for multiple purposes, really. It's helping keeping me cool, but I find it's keeping the lighting consistent for mixing my colors and for applying my paints. Especially when you're painting with the sun on your back. You know, I've done a few paintings like that before and, you know, mixed all my colors and everything looked good out in the sun. And I took my painting home. And when I looked at it in the studio, it looked completely different. I found the colors were off, and the painting was really dark. So I ended up just not showing anybody that painting. I'd be too embarrassed to hang a painting like that in a gallery because it just wouldn't be the impression of what I was trying to paint on location. It looks so different. What I find is that on a sunny day like this, if you have direct sunlight, you know, it skews your color perception. And with the shadow, it's almost mimicking the lighting that we have indoors or in the gallery, that it's not a direct light. That's why I like to use an umbrella under circumstances like this. And, you know, of course, if it's raining or anything like that, it comes in handy as well. This umbrella, it's called Best Umbrella. I think it was an artist who designed it. I've been using it for a few years and it's just been so handy. Clips on so nicely and I get a really good range of angles, so I can always shift it to create a shadow on my painting. So I'm almost finished sketching in my composition here. My focal point for this painting is really about the flowers, the wildflowers. I want it to be a play of the colors of the flowers, as taking up the largest surface area of the canvas. Basically the barns are just kind of framing the flowers. They're just supporting elements to the composition. Here, as usual, I usually start mixing my shadow colors, the darkest darks, and then I move on to my midtones and my highlights. When I'm mixing my colors, I'm thinking about the value, the shade, the value, how dark, how light. And I'm also thinking about, obviously, what hue, what color it is. But color temperature is a really big thing to consider. Especially if you're painting in kind of an impressionistic style. You want to be aware of complementary colors are you using. Is this shadow cool or is it warm? Is the highlight going to be, warm if your shadow is cool? And because I don't use any black on my palette, I'm just trying to mix pure color here. I'm not trying to deaden anything. If it's a warm shadow, you can see I'm mixing like a purple. As you see with all my paintings, I like to put down thickly my paints. Sometimes because I might mix a color and then I might use that color later on for another mixture. And if I have a large pool of color to take from, it comes in handy later on. And I can load my brushes, get some nice impasto paint when I have lots of color on my palette. I wanted to paint the barn first because the shadows are moving so quickly. I was afraid that I was going to lose whatever little bits of shadow I had on the barn. That was the first object. It is a good rule of thumb to try to get in the things that will be changing the most in your painting first. If you're painting, some boats and you can see that they're going to be moving, try to get it in before the boat moves or in this case, before the shadows change too drastically. Because within, about 2 hours time, the shadows might disappear completely off the side of the barn. But the flowers won't be affected as much because there's no real harsh shadows in the foreground. So now I'm working on the grass area, which is pretty much the largest area of color. And I want to overlap the flower colors on top of it. I basically want the colors to be the most intense color. This is the focal point of the painting. I'm also keeping a fairly high key as well. It's something that the Impressionists did very well was they kept their colors very light, very intense. It kind of has like an atmospheric quality to it. It's all about the color and, there's color bouncing around everywhere, especially on such a bright, sunny day like today. This is one of my favorite parts is painting in the sky. It's the time where you're going to use the purest amount of blue, and it gives you that sense of depth. The further things are away from us, the more blue they tend to be. Even if there was a lot of clouds, I'd be tempted to, just fill in that blue area and then overlay some lighter clouds on top. Again, working from background to foreground, oil paints is fantastic for that, just layering things on top of each other. It's such a forgiving medium. And I'm being very sporadic with my brushwork. I don't want to give too much attention to any one area in the flowers. I want it to be about the colors. And if you start to get too finicky about painting every flower, your eye will get stuck in that area. Especially to begin with, you want to keep it loose, just loose, expressive brush strokes. It's great to take some time and study the works by artists that you admire. I mean, I love plein air artists. I really enjoy work by the Impressionists. For a few years, I've been noticing that a lot of Impressionistic paintings have like these accent colors, like this lavender, purple, a turquoise, and a pink. I think it's because they're thinking about color temperature. If there's like a neutral color and it kind of warms up, just say like a gray or a beige that you would normally see. So an impressionist, they're interpreting the world around them. They're not just seeing, beige or grays. They're trying to use color as much as possible to interpret. So, if there's a gray or a beige color that's slightly warm, it might look purplish. If it's cooler, it might be more turquoise. If it's direct sunlight, a beige might look more pink or salmon. So yeah, I've been noticing that these midtones or highlight areas will have this shimmer of these colors. So that's why I pre-mixed these colors for myself to have ready, in such a circumstance. Sometimes when you're out on location, you want just some immediate color, some vibrant color. Yeah, and in this case, it's been so handy because there's such intense flowers. My colors were very close to matching it, so it's really handy. And this is where, as your own style develops, is you notice that certain colors resonate with you more than other ones. I've been finding over the past few years, I've been enjoying more bright, intense colors. I've been experimenting with different blues. For the longest time, I used ultramarine blue, and I recently switched to phthalo blue because I was able to get more vibrant turquoise colors with phthalo. It is a very intense blue. As well, I've been experimenting with cobalt blue. I think that's a common color among the Impressionists. As an artist, you never stop learning. You're always experimenting, always trying different things. That's the fun thing about it. It's never dull. You're always learning something new. After you complete your painting, I always like to take a picture of it and view the finished painting as a thumbnail, basically. You can, make some artistic judgments about your painting differently as if you're standing back from it, very far away. Because you want it to work at the size of a thumbnail. You want it to be able to read well. So sometimes that's what I'll do is I'll look at it in a small format, and then I'll go back to my painting and touch up areas, maybe soften areas, blend things a little bit more. I'm adding a bit more intense green, some more yellows in the foreground. It tends to bring things forward. The blue pushes things back, and the warm colors pushes things forward. I feel pretty happy with how things turned out with this painting. My motif was the field of flowers. Well, here we are with all three paintings. Yeah, that was quite the adventure. We got out to 3 different places. Every painting is a different composition, different lighting circumstances, different weather. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with how things worked out. Maybe I would have been happier if I painted a little bit thicker. I never seem to feel like I push it far enough. But I encourage you yourself to try impasto painting, to not be afraid of your materials, and put more paint out on your palette. And don't be afraid to put it on thickly, smear it on there. Yeah, it's great to have some fun and to challenge yourself. So the first painting here, that's pretty much the only painting that I touched up in the studio. It was a foggy day, and when I took the painting home, I noticed that the background tree line had a harsh edge to it, and I wanted it to be much softer. I wanted most of the hard edges to be in the foreground elements. But other than that, everything else was painted on location, alla prima, plein air. And the second painting here, the boats at the harbor front, I felt like one of the challenging parts of this painting was painting the boats. There was a lot of detail, a lot of information in the boats part. So I had to treat it more abstractly and not get caught up in the details. Otherwise, I would have been spending a lot more time painting this. And when you're painting on location, you have to simplify. Yeah, but overall, I'm pretty happy with that as well. And the last painting here, yeah, I feel like the flowers in the field are the motif of the painting. Most of the excitement, the range of colors is happening in that area, and the barns are just supporting the composition. But yeah, I'm just happy overall with how everything worked out. So thanks so much for watching.